You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas.
Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
Welcome to another exciting, fun-filled episode of our True Crime podcast. And thank you all so much for listening. We hope you've enjoyed our last couple of episodes.
So what have we been talking about in the last couple of episodes, Kristin Dilley?
We had a really wonderful conversation with Kate Miles, author of Trailed, who came in to talk to us about the recent developments in the Julie Williams and Lolly Winans murders, as well as her criticisms, rightfully, of some of the ways that the FBI was handling this information. We shared some of her criticisms, and so I feel like it was a very good, interesting, and insightful conversation, and we hope that all of you feel that way as well. We just ran 2 brand new episodes last Monday and last Thursday featuring Kate. I think we had a lot of really good information to put out there, and so we hope that all of you enjoyed it too. We know it was a much anticipated episode. We'd mentioned that Kate was going to come on the pod, and people were very excited. We hope that we did you proud with those episodes. Bill, what did you think about our conversations with Kate?
I thought it was terrific in terms of a conversation. I learned a lot, and Kate's insights into the Julie Williams, Lolly Winans case and the investigation of that case I thought were extremely interesting. I saw all the enthusiastic questions that we received on social media from our listeners, and I know you tried to integrate as many of those questions as you could into the conversation. One thing Kate mentioned that I'm also hearing from other sources now is that a lot of people in the media, and I would actually put Catherine Miles in the media category, Trailed is probably the definitive version of what happened, at least publicly, in the Julie Williams, Lolly Winans murder. And she expressed a great deal of frustration with the FBI's ongoing refusal to answer questions about how they did this amazing work in solving the Shenandoah murders and identifying Walter Leo Jackson Sr. as the killer of Julie Williams and Lolly Winans. I just want to mention, I'll leave names out of it, but I'm hearing from a number of other media sources that they have been asking the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office the exact same type of questions that Kate was asking the FBI recently. And they're getting the straight arm, just a complete refusal. The U.S. Attorney is saying, ask the FBI. And then the FBI is saying, we won't answer those questions. I think their behavior is outrageous. I really do.
I agree. And there are some similarities to the way that the FBI is handling this information about Shenandoah and the way that they handled the information in our case back in January. What we'd like to do for this episode is we would like to, first of all, share a story that ran in the Virginian Pilot about our case a couple of weeks back. We were initially going to get to it before the news on Shenandoah broke, but then Shenandoah needed to come first, understandably. So we're going to share that article, and then we're going to go ahead and have a sort of compare contrast session, if you will, about the things that we see the FBI having done in our case that they are continuing to do in Shenandoah. And I think that will be illuminating for everybody to see what the FBI's standard practice is when it comes to providing or not providing information that they don't want people to know.
This article actually ran in 2 newspapers. It ran in the Virginian Pilot and in the Daily Press. Peter Dujardin is the reporter. We're going to steer you towards the Virginian because that one is not behind a paywall. It's essentially the same article, same photographs. It's very well written and researched. when we talk about the article, we're mostly going to be referencing the edition that appeared in Virginian because it's not behind a paywall.
This article has actually been in the works for a while. When Bill was here in Virginia with me on May 13th for our live event, this reporter, Peter Dujardin, showed up at our event and had a chance to talk with Bill a little more in depth. So this has been in the works for quite a while, and it is quite an excellent, thorough, in-depth article because we know that there are people from other countries who cannot necessarily see this information. We wanted to go ahead and have an episode where we shared it out with you, and then we unpack the contents here. So I'll go ahead and start, and then Bill will fly in with color commentary as needed. So this is from the Virginian Pilot. FBI suspects Northern Neck man in second Colonial Parkway murder case, families told, by Peter Dujardin. Published June 16th, 2024. A deceased Lancaster County waterman, Alan Wade Wilmer Sr., was implicated earlier this year in one of the Colonial Parkway murders. The state police announced in January that Wilmer's DNA matched genetic material found in the slayings 37 years ago of David Knobling, 20, and Robin Edwards, 14. On September 21st, 1987, Knobling's pickup was found unattended in a small parking lot near the James River Bridge in Isle of Wight County. The driver's door flung open, the radio playing, and his wallet on the dashboard. 2 days later, the two bodies washed ashore at a nature preserve 2 miles downriver. Both had been shot. The teen, Robin Edwards, had been sexually assaulted.
Couple of things. First of all, we're not here to pick apart Peter Dujardin's article. We actually think it's 3 days later, depending on how you look at it. It was not public information, although we knew about it for decades, that Robin Edwards had been sexually assaulted. We knew that Robin had been sexually assaulted. We knew that there was DNA available as a result of that sexual assault. And we knew for a number of years, but never stated publicly, that they had tested the DNA several times unsuccessfully. Remember, this case dates all the way back to 87. Forensics are not what they are now in 2024. And one of our concerns was that with the repeated testing of the evidence in Robin's body, we were concerned that we might run out of DNA. Fortunately, that did not pan out, but that was something that was very much bubbling under for a number of years, especially in the last year since we learned that the Virginia State Police were going back and retesting the evidence in the Robin Edwards David Knobling murder.
Also at the January news conference, Hampton police said they had connected Wilmer to the 1989 slaying of 29-year-old Teresa Lynn Howell, a case not previously tied to the Parkway cases. The York County woman left a nightclub on East Mercury Boulevard that July and was found dead at a Hampton construction site the next morning. She had been raped and strangled. And just as a reminder, we were not familiar with Teresa Lynn Howell's name or her case by the time this January press conference rolled around. This is brand new information to us. We have since talked to her family quite a bit more and are learning more about her. At the point that all of this came up in January, we did not have any knowledge of Terry Howell or her case at that point. Though Wilmer died of natural causes in 2017 at age 63, investigators were able to link the Northern Neck man to the cold cases by DNA. The state police and Hampton police said he would have been charged with murder if he were still alive. Now, the FBI has told 2 more families that Wilmer is the primary suspect in another Colonial Parkway case, a presumed double slaying that Wilmer was suspected of some 36 years ago. And by that, of course, we're referring to the case of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley.
And this was one of the things we were extremely unhappy about. We knew months before the January press conference that this news was coming from our other media sources. So we were told months before, this would have been in October 2023, from these media sources, that a suspect had been identified in the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley, and specifically in the murder of Robin Edwards and David Knobling. And then this was the first time we heard this name, Teresa Lynn Howell, as Kristin says, a victim we were not familiar with at that time. What was disturbing then is as the press conference unfolds and somehow the Keith Call, Cassandra Haley information is not forthcoming. They don't even mention it. And that part created a significant amount of frustration for us.
The FBI cleared Wilmer in the 1988 case after he passed a lie detector test, according to an author who in 2016 interviewed the region's former special agent in charge who oversaw the investigation. That author, of course, is Blaine Pardo, who we were very happy to have as our special guest at our May 13th live event at the York County Library.
And the former special agent in charge at the FBI Newport News and Norfolk offices is the late Irv Wells, who died a couple of years ago. And in addition to talking to Blaine Pardo about this, I spoke with Irv Wells myself on 2 separate occasions for a number of hours, and he went back and reiterated what Kristin and I often called privately the driveway story, because it involved 2 FBI agents going up to Alan Wade Wilmer Sr.'s family's home in Lancaster, Virginia. And we'll get into more details on that in a couple of minutes.
But Wilmer is now back atop the suspect list, victims' families have recently been told. In that case, 2 Christopher Newport University students, Keith Call, 20, of Gloucester, and Sandra Haley, 18, of York County, left a party near CNU about 2 a.m. on April 10th, 1988, on their first date. About 6 hours later, a ranger on the Colonial Parkway found Call's 1982 Toyota Celica pulled over on a scenic overlook of the York River near Indian Field Creek. The driver's door was open, and Call's car keys were on the front seat, the Daily Press reported at the time. Investigators also found beer cans, Haley's purse, Call's wallet, and the couple's clothes, press accounts said. Searches of the water found no trace of the couple. They were never seen again.
When we talk about DNA evidence and items from Keith and Sandy's car, by the way, when you see a list like this from Peter Dujardin, this gives you a pretty good idea of the kind of things that were tested back in the 80s, had been retested, and now are going back, in some cases, for a 3rd or even 4th test, with advanced forensics improving every single year. These items have been tested and even retested, looking for more information about, can we place an offender at the point where Keith and Sandy go missing? And the last place we know about is Keith Call's Toyota Celica.
There's a subhead titled, "What Did FBI Say at Meeting?" About a month ago, Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley, who run the Mind Over Murder podcast, delivered news during a recording before a packed house at the Yorktown Library. Thomas said the FBI told the Call and Haley families that federal agents are nearly certain Wilmer killed them. Thomas, of Connecticut, is an older brother to Kathy Thomas, a Naval Academy graduate who was killed in the first Colonial Parkway slaying in 1986. A retired executive in the entertainment industry, Thomas now spends plenty of hours these days on the Parkway cases.
I laughed out loud when I read this because I don't think of myself as very retired.
Yeah, you've never described yourself that way either.
No, I usually resist that word, but it is what it is. One of the reasons, and this won't surprise anybody, I don't know how often I've said this out loud, one of the reasons why we moved back to the East Coast from Los Angeles was I was intending to spend more time helping to move forward the Colonial Parkway murders, with your help, of course, and the help of many other people. And then we worked like dogs on this old house we're fixing up here in Connecticut. And right around the time we were done with the first phase, which is redoing the interior of this big old house, we are emerging from our burrow. Picture, I don't know, a meerkat or a rabbit sticking its head out of the hole. A prairie dog. I like prairie dogs.
Prairie dog, there you go.
And then this thing came along, which my older brother, who's a doctor and epidemiologist, actually, Richard studies disease outbreaks. He told us there was this thing coming from China, and we were like, what? And so then the next thing you know, for the next 3 years or so, we're all hunkered down with this thing called COVID. So that really slowed us down in terms of travel and the ability to get to Virginia, and a lot of stuff that was really important to us wasn't happening. And even when you and I first created Mind Over Murder, our intention was that we were going to do a fair amount of episodes face-to-face. With COVID and all, we ended up doing some workarounds that I think have worked pretty well that mostly involve Kristin in Virginia, Bill in Connecticut. It's actually exciting when we're in the same room.
Yeah, it was very interesting because right from the jump, you and I had recorded a couple episodes. What was it? It was in December of 2019 with a drop date of January 2020. And then right around the time that we dropped, we were hearing about this crazy pandemic called COVID, but also at the same time, my school had caught on fire and we were having all sorts of issues with that. And then we got shut down entirely for the pandemic. And there was all sorts of absolutely bananas things going on in our life. So I would say really, this is the first year where we've been able to consistently see each other and work together. But even still, when you're down here, it's not like we're sitting down at my kitchen table doing podcasts.
No,
it's mainly you and I running around and seeing people.
Yeah, we did sit down briefly at your kitchen table recently when I was down there doing one of our live podcast events, which Peter Desjardins references in the article. We still haven't recorded a face-to-face episode since the very beginning of Mind Over Murder.
No, we did one when I came up to visit you with Mark.
Yes,
and we did
right.
one in your office, but I think that's
the last time.
That's really the only time.
We were on opposite sides of the table as opposed to communicating electronically.
Yeah, and of course it was wonderful to do the live sessions here, but that is still very different doing a live podcast in front of a live audience than it is just doing what we do. The FBI, including its lead Colonial Parkway investigator, sat down with the Colin Haley families 2 days before the January 8th news conference, Thomas said in the podcast recording on May 13th. Quote, they said they were 99% sure that Alan Wade Wilmer was responsible for the disappearance and likely homicide of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley, Thomas said. They said that privately to the families.
This is one of the areas of great frustration, as you'll see as the article unfolds. The families have been told things privately by the FBI and the Virginia State Police, and then the discomfort kicks in, and even anger at times. And I don't just mean me here, other family members. They're very uncomfortable with being told something privately by the FBI, but then the FBI and the Virginia State Police won't confirm those things in a public way. And this is really compounding the unhappiness for the families because, as we've talked about before, it's not like Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. is going to be brought into a courtroom and charged with rape and murder in the Colonial Parkway murders and perhaps kidnapping and other charges. The man's been dead since what, 2017? We don't understand all of the secrecy, but I'll let you continue with the article.
When the state police and FBI held the joint news conference 2 days later, nobody mentioned the 1988 case. One of Sandy Haley's two older sisters, Terry Haley Holman, disputed Thomas's assertions, saying the case agent and the FBI did not speak so definitively at the January meeting. All they wanted us to know was that Wilmer was connected to the Isle of Wight and Hampton cases, and possibly to ours, is all they would say, said Haley Holman, 63, of Northern Virginia. But nobody ever said 99%. They never even said in the 90s. They never gave a percentage.
I'm not looking to get into a pissing contest with Terry Haley Holman, who's someone I hold in very high regard, and we've worked very closely together over the years. I think my mistake is I think I'm blending conversations that took place with different family members. Clearly, Terry did not hear the FBI say 99%. Other family members did, because I think everybody knows me well enough to know I'm not making this up. I said 99% because the FBI said 99%. Clearly, Terry didn't hear that, and perhaps it wasn't said to her. So in that regard, I owe Terry an apology. I don't mean to make it sound like she was told something that she was not.
Haley Holman said the FBI agent did relay that eyewitnesses put Wilmer on the Colonial Parkway in the vicinity of where Call's car was found, and that Wilmer put himself there that night when the FBI interrogated him in 1988. And we're pretty sure that is related to this habit we have learned that he had of stalking couples on the Colonial Parkway, walking up to the windows of cars, banging on them, asking for driver's licenses, not registration, just driver's licenses, and that sort of behavior. So when it says Wilmer put himself there, I assume, and again, this is just an assumption, but Bill, you can jump right in there with me if you think so. I assume that is him basically copying to, yeah, I was on the parkway doing that thing I do. I assume that's what that was.
Also, we've heard a version of the story of the disappearance of Keith Call and Cassandra Haley, where different people reported that this man driving this very distinctive truck, this 1966 Dodge Dakota pickup truck, blue-green in color with writing on the doors and with this very distinctive rig on the back used by watermen, and that he was cruising one of these half-moon pull-offs after another. That particular night, he may or may not have been harassing couples. No one said they were harassed that evening. Supposedly, his cover story was that he was looking for a woman he'd met in an X-rated theater. I know this sounds absurd. That's what he claimed. But he did, as Terry's pointing out, put himself on the Colonial Parkway the night that Keith and Sandy went missing.
Continuing with Terry's quote, if that's 99%, I beg to differ, because it's really not, said Haley Holman, who worked for about 5 years as a Newport News police officer, because he frequented that place a lot. So until I have DNA or something a little more concrete, I'm not signing off on it.
Let me add, Terry's right. As I said, if I owe her an apology, I don't mean to put words in her mouth regarding the 99%. So I think that's where we're getting a little bit of the pushback from Terry, and she's completely entitled to say what she says. And remember, she was in the room when much of this was discussed. I was not. But let's also remember other family members were also in the room and had follow-up conversations with the FBI, and that's where the 99% comment originates from. You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after this word from our sponsors. We're back here at Mind Over Murder. Before we get back to the podcast, just wanted to remind you that we have a GoFundMe effort going on right now. This campaign is designed to help us raise funds to help promote Mind Over Murder and specifically to push the Colonial Parkway Murders investigation forward. We'd love it if you could support us in any way that you can. Any donation from $5 to whatever you can afford is very much appreciated and will be incredibly helpful. The link is in the show notes and in our social media pages. As always, thanks for your support. Now back to Mind Over Murder.
Because Call and Haley's bodies are still missing, DNA testing has been hampered. A diver's search of a section of the York River in February failed to turn up any new leads. Keith Call's Toyota was returned to the family and sold off decades ago. But sources said the FBI still has some evidence from the crime scene that is being retested with more advanced techniques. There's stuff at the lab, but I have no idea what, Haley Holman said. They don't go into specifics.
Our sources, by the way, have pointed out to us they now believe that the FBI, Virginia State Police, and a number of other agencies have actually conducted 3 separate water searches since January in specific locations. I find the whole thing a bit baffling. I'm not criticizing, and we're outside the investigation, so I can't tell you anything that we know about these water searches. I'm straining a little bit to figure out what the FBI, Virginia State Police, and other agencies and their dive teams working together. One witness who spoke to us a couple of weeks ago said there were as many as a dozen different vehicles at these sites. I strain a little bit because I'm trying to figure out what would they find 36 years later in these bodies of water, particularly when we know that Wilmer had access to a boat, the Denny Wade, and he used that boat frequently. We think there's a very strong possibility he may have taken bodies out and disposed of them in deeper water. So these searches, which are actually fairly close to the Colonial Parkway, I don't know. I suppose there could be bones or something made of metal like a knife or a gun or other weapon that may have been tossed in the water. I think this is a real long shot. I admire law enforcement for trying everything they can think of, and perhaps they have new information regarding places they should be looking at for potential evidence disposal sites. It seems like a long shot, but other long shots have panned out. So I appreciate the fact that they're trying.
Call's sister, Joyce Call Canada, said she doesn't remember the FBI agent giving a percentage certainty in Wilmer's culpability in her brother's and Haley's disappearance. They said he's a strong suspect, said Call Canada, 62, of Gloucester, that he was seen all around that area where the car was dropped off. Thomas, however, stands by what he said in the May podcast, which he said was based on conversations with someone in the room. I know what I know, and I know what people told me, he said Friday. You need to know the FBI is putting a tremendous amount of pressure on a lot of different people, myself included. They don't like what we're saying, even though it's the truth. I feel like I should just have you read your own quotes out loud. Here I am doing my best Bill Thomas impression when, like, there you are right there.
No, you're doing a good job of playing Bill Thomas. Go right ahead.
Do you want to speak to that, though, about the fact that, because it is a very interesting quote there, Bill, the FBI is putting a tremendous amount of pressure on a lot of different people, myself included. Do you want to speak to that a little bit, or do we not want to give the FBI any more ammo?
Things I think are somewhat better than they were, but as recently as a year ago, the FBI put a very serious amount of pressure on me. They do not like me being so outspoken, and they have criticized me directly and indirectly. I'd rather they criticize me to my face than slag me behind my back, but there's been a fair amount of that too. There's been a number of people that are part of this investigation, including witnesses, other family members, and others who've been told, do not talk to Bill Thomas. At the family briefing, they made a great emphatic point, do not share this information with Bill Thomas. I actually said to our case agent fairly recently, look, I said, a dozen people have come to me in the last few months and said to me that they were told, do not talk to Bill Thomas. Now, some of these people didn't even know who the hell I was. But of course, when someone says don't talk to someone, I think a lot of people then respond, who the heck is this guy? And why can't I talk to him?
Yeah.
And then, of course, they started to do a little digging themselves. They figured out who I was. They figured out who Kristin Dilley was. They actually started listening to this podcast. And then the next thing, my phone is ringing with people in a number of these examples. These are people I've never met before, never spoken to them before, but they have information in this case. Now, obviously, we're urging them to talk to the FBI and the Virginia State Police, particularly if anyone indicates that they have information about Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. or any other aspect of the Colonial Parkway murders. It doesn't begin and end with Kristin and Bill. We want them to talk to law enforcement. Some people won't. They don't trust law enforcement. And of course, the FBI and the Virginia State Police have done themselves no favors by not being transparent and straightforward. Like I said, Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. is dead. We're not bringing him up on trial. I don't know why we're worried about his civil rights and not the rights of at least 8 young people and probably a lot more. But I actually said to our FBI agent, this campaign that you're involved in, where you keep telling people not to talk to Bill Thomas, it's not working. All you're doing is making people call me, because now they're thinking, well, who's Bill Thomas and why can't I talk to him? Mm-hmm. And then something that's come out of the podcast live events that we've done in Virginia is people have reached out to us and said, you two, Kristin and Bill, are the only ones that are doing your best to answer questions honestly about what's going on with the Colonial Parkway murders. Now, the FBI and the Virginia State Police and perhaps other agencies might not like that, but you know something? When there's an information void, which is exactly what's been created by misleading press conferences and refusing to answer questions, people still have questions, and a ton of questions. Mm-hmm. And if they can't get their questions answered by law enforcement, huge mistake in my opinion, then they're going to continue seeking information, and they end up talking to people like Kristin Dilley and Bill Thomas.
Exactly. Next subhead, Wilmer was a suspect 36 years ago. For one thing, Thomas said the FBI has not fully acknowledged that agents had Wilmer within their grasp in 1988 and let him slip away. The FBI is not happy that we're highlighting the fact that Wilmer was suspect number 1 in the disappearance of Keith Call and Sandra Haley, he said. Last week, the FBI's Norfolk field office declined to say whether its agents believe Wilmer killed the CNU students.
Insert obscene gesture here.
Yeah. I was trying to figure out, should I comment on that gesture you just made or no, which I've never seen you do before either, by the way.
I'm sorry. My mother would be ashamed of me at this point.
Your mother would not be happy about that, Bill.
All right, continuing.
The Haley Call investigation is still an active and open investigation, so I am not able to give specifics on that case, FBI spokeswoman Cassandra Temple said. We also wouldn't be able to comment on any discussions we have with the victims' families. Though the FBI and state police declined to say at the January news conference how Wilmer first was developed as a suspect, an FBI spokeswoman told the Daily Press 2 days later that he was initially suspected in the Haley and Call case. That acknowledgement came after Blaine Pardo, who co-wrote A Special Kind of Evil, a book about the Colonial Parkway murders, began telling media outlets that Wilmer was squarely on the FBI's radar in that couple's 1988 disappearance.
Thanks to Blaine and other reporters like Andy Fox,
who asked the initial question anyway. Thank you, Andy.
Yes.
And was turned down twice.
Right.
He asked twice and they refused to answer twice.
And I think you and I played a role here too in raising a bit of a ruckus, saying, why aren't you saying that Wilmer was a suspect as far back as 1988? I recognize the fact that this is embarrassing to the FBI, but if they won't deal with these questions in a straightforward manner, they actually just hurt themselves and undercut the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Virginia State Police's credibility. I actually think, and this is coming from someone who has been a media and communications person, a public relations person, I've done legislative affairs for 40 years. They would have been better off just admitting that Wilmer was a suspect as far back as 1988, that he was questioned, his premises were searched, he was given 2 polygraph examinations, and ultimately cleared by the FBI. We all understand that DNA hadn't even made it out of the lab back in 1988. And there were reasons that Wilmer was moved to the less likely list back in 88. But now that it's 2024 and they've identified Wilmer as a suspect, why not treat the American people with a modicum of respect and just admit, hey, he was on our list. We looked hard at this guy, but we weren't able to prove it based on the information and evidence we had in 1988. And as long as it took me to tell that short story, if that's how long it would have taken the FBI, and yeah, okay, there would have been some squawking, and I'm sure I would have said something about how unhappy we were. I think it's a lot better off than them putting out misleading statements, which is really what they are, refusing to answer the question twice, Kristin, as you pointed out. And then a couple of days later, then you've got Blaine Pardo, Kristin Dilley, Bill Thomas, Andy Fox, and a number of other people saying, wait a second, Wilmer was a suspect back in 88. Why are you failing to mention this?
If you didn't want to make a big deal out of it, you shouldn't have tried to hide it.
Then don't make a big deal about it. Just suck it up.
Just suck it up and deal with it.
Tell everybody what happened, and we'll all move on.
Accountability and transparency. Pardo told the Daily Press that he spent a day in 2016 interviewing Irvin B. Wells III, the former special agent in charge of the FBI's Norfolk Field Office, about the Parkway killings. Wells, who died in 2022, told Pardo that the FBI developed a profile of the killer as a local fisherman. The profile came about after the first couple slain in 1986 featured a fishing cord, a curved sharp knife, and diesel fuel. A few days after Colin Haley disappeared in 1988, the FBI learned of a fisherman in a pickup truck approaching couples on the Parkway. The FBI began watching him and spotted him cleaning and spray painting his older truck 4 days later. Pardo said Wells couldn't remember the fisherman's name during the 2016 interview, but the former special agent recalled the man had a license plate such as Edom Raw. At the January news conference, a state police spokeswoman released a picture of Wilmer's license plate, EM Raw, along with 1988 pictures of his faded blue pickup and a fishing boat.
As I mentioned, I also interviewed Irv Wells twice for hours at a time when we were shooting the Lover's Lane television series. One of the other things that Wells said to me, which really resonated, and Blaine Pardo remembered this as well, which is that the Colonial Parkway murders were the single greatest professional regret that Irv Wells had in his very esteemed, probably 40-year FBI career. The failure to solve this case was the thing that bothered him the most.
Next subhead, Wilmer was cleared after polygraph. Pardo said Wells told him in 2016 that the FBI administered a lie detector test on the fisherman in 1988. He passed, shocking Wells. I know this guy did it, the special agent told his underlings at the time, according to Pardo's account. You guys better be, expletive, right. But after the polygraph, Pardo said the FBI literally let him go.
And this is a story that I heard, just so we're clear on this, in 1988. So I heard this in real time from my father, Joe Thomas, who passed on a few years ago. And he was in touch with Mr. Wells and the case agents regularly during this time frame. And he, my dad, filled me in frequently on his conversations with them. And he told me the driveway story back in 1988. Flash forward all those years in the 2016 or so time frame when I met with Wells and he told me the driveway story. I wanted to hear the whole thing from top to bottom. But as soon as he started telling me the story, I remembered that my dad had spoken to the case agents about their great disappointment and how they were absolutely certain they had the right guy. And it appears that Irv Wells told Blaine Pardo the same thing.
The Colonial Parkway is a secluded 22-mile U.S. roadway that runs between Jamestown and Yorktown by way of Williamsburg. The Colonial Parkway murders, as they are widely known, include 8 homicides over 3 years. 2 couples are believed to have been killed on the parkway itself in wooded sections of the roadway in York County, but in the public's mind, the cases have also long included the killings of Noblin and Edwards in Isle of Wight and another couple slain off Route 64 in New Kent County. The FBI said the entire case is still an active one. We're thankful to everyone who has written or called into the tip line since the last announcement naming Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. as a suspect in January, Temple said. We are continuing to encourage the public to call into the FBI's tip line 1-800-CALL-FBI or tips.fbi.gov. No tip is too small and can be crucial in aiding this investigation. Virginia State Police spokeswoman Corinne Geller asked that anyone who may have spent time with Wilmer, including hunting, farming oysters and clams with him or docking next to him at area marinas to call the FBI or to email the state police at questions@vsp.virginia.gov.
And we would reiterate, we completely support this. And if you have any information about Alan Wade Wilmer or any aspect of the Colonial Parkway murders, please contact the FBI or the Virginia State Police. They really do want to hear from you. And as Corinne Geller says, no piece of information is too small. Something that you might not think is significant could be a key to helping advance this case. Really important that our listeners and anyone who hears this report understands that we absolutely want people to contact law enforcement with any information they might have.
Yeah, even though we are sitting here leveling criticisms at the FBI and the VSP for the way that they have handled this, that does not mean that we want you to not give tips to them. They are the best investigative bodies to deal with this. We are not investigators. We keep saying it. We need to reiterate it. Bill and I are not equipped to investigate this stuff. We're just not. For anybody who has reached out to us with tips, we really appreciate it, but please don't just take it to us. Take it to the FBI and take it to the VSP. They're the only people who are equipped to deal with this stuff. We are not. We are podcasters. Final subhead. Closure would be nice. Terry Haley Holman said that while she's not sure whether Wilmer killed Sandra, who would now be 55, it also wouldn't surprise her. He did it to other people, so it's very possible, she said. I just find it hard to believe that he could do it by himself, and I'd just like some concrete information. Closure in her own and other family members' lifetimes would be nice, she said. Thomas said he doesn't know whether Wilmer killed his 27-year-old sister Kathy, who was found dead with her girlfriend, 21-year-old Becky Dowski, on the Colonial Parkway in 1986. I believe that Alan Wade Wilmer will be linked to other unsolved homicides, Thomas said. I am rock solid certain about that. I can't say for certain that he killed Kathy and Becky. I think it's too early to say.
And this is why we were so emphatic several months ago about the need to put Alan Wade Wilmer Sr.'s DNA into CODIS. And we feel very strongly that the Commonwealth of Virginia needs to change its rules. This man is a confirmed serial killer by FBI standards. He killed 3 people in 2 separate incidents, which qualifies him for serial killer status. He's dead. He's not going to trial anytime soon. And putting his DNA into CODIS could benefit the FBI, the Virginia State Police, and who knows how many other law enforcement agencies and families who are looking for answers. Again, we will continue to be harping on this. We need to put Wilmer's DNA into the CODIS system.
Absolutely. The Mind Over Murder podcast, which delves into the Colonial Parkway cases and other true crimes, posts a new episode every Monday. I'm looking for answers, Thomas said, of his focus on his sister's case 38 years on. I've talked to so many people in law enforcement that have worked this case. They've told me over and over again that this is a solvable case. It just takes time, attention, and resources. And the FBI wasn't putting in the time, attention, and resources until the family started ratcheting up the pressure. And that brings us to the end of our article. That's a nice mic drop there, Mr. Thomas. What do you say?
I think it's the truth. Other people may disagree with me, and they're welcome to. As a matter of fact, if someone wants to tell us where we think we're wrong, please reach out to us via our social media pages, the Colonial Parkway Murders page on Facebook, the Mind Over Murder page on Facebook, and of course we also have Twitter, now called X, for reasons I still don't completely understand. We would love to hear from people, what their theories are, what they think, particularly people that have what they hope will be new information, which they'd like to provide to law enforcement. We welcome a discussion about this. It's not like Kristin and Bill are saying we're right and everybody else is wrong. Far from it.
Right.
And we do support further investigation into this case because we think that as law enforcement continues to work this case, I think they're going to solve more of the Colonial Parkway murders. And as we saw with Teresa Howell, I think we're going to identify other victims. And those families are waiting for answers too. And it's something I think is very important that understand. We just saw new figures that we are now looking at probably 350,000 cold case homicides. We were using a number of 250,000. Now the number we're seeing from good, strong sources is we're probably talking about 350,000 cold case homicides. Remember, that means that there are literally millions of people going to bed every night for the rest of their lives waiting for answers in terms of who killed their loved ones. And I think those families deserve answers.
Well said. Now, shifting gears just for 1 second to return to the news in the Shenandoah case. Again, you want to talk about families that have waited a very long time for answers. The Williams and the Winans family have finally received information that will help them gain that. Again, we hate using that word closure, guys, because there really is no such thing. If you don't want to take it from me, you can take it from Bill and any of the other family members. There is no such thing as closure in this case, but at least now the Williams and the Winans family have answers. In some cases, it is too little too late. I know the parents in one of these cases have passed on already. Bill, remind me which one that is.
Yeah, years ago I had talked to both fathers. Mr. and Mrs. Winans have both passed on in more recent years. I saw some very eloquent quotes from Tom Williams, who is Julie's father. But the reason we saw no quotes from the Winans family is because both the mother and the father are gone now. I think there are other family members, siblings, and other folks. It just saddens me that even in the years I've been involved in these cases, I had reached out to the Williams and Winans families to share information and talk to them and get their perspectives. And I can picture Tom Williams' voice in my head in reading the quotes in the media coverage. And I'm pleased for them that they finally have some of the answers that they were looking for. It saddens me that Mr. and Mrs. Winans are gone. And like so many of the parents in the Colonial Parkway murders, they went to their graves without answers. And that part, I think, is the worst part of this whole thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're far enough into this episode at this point that it doesn't even feel worth it to say that we're burying the lead on this because we are right here at the end. But I do think it's really important just to emphasize for everybody, in case you missed it in the 2 episodes that we did with Kate, it is really important to remind everybody at the press conference about the Shenandoah case, the FBI did go out of their way to say the murders of Julie Williams and Lolly Winans were not in any way connected to those of Kathy Thomas and Becky Dowski. So I just want to ask, Bill, number one, we've reiterated it, but number 2, how did you feel when you heard that? There have been so many similarities between Julie and Lolly's case and Kathy and Becky's. Were you hoping that there was going to be a connection, or are you relieved that there isn't one? What are your thoughts on that?
Based on what I knew, I was fairly certain that there wasn't going to be a connection. And back in 96, the FBI did say publicly that they were looking at substantial similarities. That was the expression they used between the murder of Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski and Julie Williams and Lolly Winans. To my knowledge, they'd never found that connection, but I thought it made perfect sense that they were looking at those 2 sets of double homicides because there were so many similarities. I'm still just looking for answers now in Kathy and Becky and the other Colonial Parkway murders cases. And I think so many other cases may be provided answers as a result of this investigation. So all I can do is urge the FBI and the Virginia State Police to keep working these cases. I think there are more answers in the offing.
And there are a lot of other issues that we could get into regarding how the FBI has covered press conferences in both of these cases, but it looks like we are going to have to save that for another episode. That is going to do it for this episode of Mind Over Murder. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time. Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawlspace Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.